afternoon to everyone. I would like to very warmly welcome you to today's session, which is dedicated to digital education. Thanks to all of you who are joining remotely. My name is Antoaneta Anghilova-Krsteva, and I am the Director responsible for digital education at DG EAC of the European Commission. I would like to invite you to use the chat to introduce yourselves and to share with us any comments you may have during this session. Let me now very warmly welcome our Director General, Themis Christophidou, who is joining us for some introductory remarks. Thanks, Themis, for being with us today. I would also like to very warmly welcome our distinguished speakers. We have with us Birgit Lau, who is diplomatic representative for education at the Ministry of Education and Research of Estonia. We also have with us Florian Rampelt, who is Deputy Managing Director of the Hochschulforum Digitalisation. And we also have with us Tommaso Della Vecchia, who is Development and Advocacy Manager at the European Schoolnet, which is implementing and coordinating the Impact EdTech project. So we are very pleased to have you with us at this session today. The title of this session is The Turning Point: Digital Innovation in Education. And we would like to look at the lessons learned about the digital innovation in education during the pandemic crisis. Today we'll particularly discuss how actually to take these lessons forward in the future in order to ensure the diffusion of innovation in digital education at systemic level. As you probably know, last year the Commission adopted a multi-annual digital education action plan. And with this action plan, we would like to create a more coherent, more integrated and more effective digital education policy at EU level for the digital decade. Therefore, our session today will reflect on one of its key actions, namely the setting up of the Digital Education Hub. The ambition here is really to make this hub the interface for cooperation, for exchange and innovation in digital education for the benefit of Europe. So the hub will bring together representatives from the policy, research and private sectors, and we would like to make them cooperate in agile ways in order to find digital solutions for education and training in Europe. And the idea is indeed to bring these various stakeholders from different sectors to help them work together, to cooperate, and also to support this community to foster innovation in digital education. We are very happy that indeed today in this panel we have representatives of this variety of stakeholders. But I would like now to ask our Director General, Themis Christophidou, to further elaborate on the topic of today's session and also share with us her thoughts on digital education. Themis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antoaneta. Good afternoon to everyone. When we discussed digital innovation in education a few years ago, this was an important, forward-looking topic. Important, but not urgent. Today, it's a necessity. Reality has forced us to speed up our plans, to deal with unexpected developments, to find solutions practically overnight. The COVID-19 outbreak is one of the greatest challenges that our education and training systems in Europe have had to deal with in decades. Around the world, at the peak of the crisis, we are estimating that over 1.6 billion learners were out of school. Our consultations showed that 90% of the respondents saw the crisis as a point of no return in terms of using digital technologies for education. This is a turning point in the title of our session. Of course, on the one hand, the mass use of technology helped learning to continue. But the same reliance on technology also raised significant challenges in terms of equity and quality. About 9% of the 15-year-old students reported not having a quiet place to study at home, or not having access to a computer. Generally, economically advantaged families were better able to fill learning gaps and provide stimulating activities for their children. Moreover, around 60% of EU teachers reported that the crisis was their first experience with online and distance learning. A true baptism of fire, I could say. Ministers in charge of education saw these and other challenges firsthand. It was clear to them that cooperation was needed. So, during the first months of lockdown, ministers regularly met looking for solutions. They were willing to share and to learn from each other. This has brought them closer together. And this has led the European Commission to create more opportunities for cooperation. As Antoinetta mentioned earlier, concretely last September, we adopted the 2021-2027 Digital Education Action Plan. It's an ambitious plan, and it is here to help us address the fallout of the COVID crisis for education and training, and to support the recovery and the digital transformation in education. The plan sets out our vision of digital education based on inclusiveness and excellence. And cooperation is, of course, a fundamental element of this vision, because digital education cannot work in isolation. It requires everyone to pitch in. It requires more dialogue between stakeholders. If we are to really overcome the fragmentation of policies and experiences in digital education, if we are to make a systemic impact and identify sustainable solutions, then we need to work together more. We can make this happen with the Digital Education Hub that we're developing as one of the action plan's main elements. It will be a space for exchange, peer learning, and networking, a space for experimentation. To make it a success, we're counting on the support of the whole digital education community. This community is well represented here today by diverse stakeholders, speakers, each contributing with their unique perspectives. Today's discussion, therefore, is a first step on what I firmly believe will be a very valuable path. A path that leads digital education from being a necessity today to becoming a fabulous building block of inclusive and excellent education tomorrow. I thank you for your attention, and I am looking forward to a very fruitful panel.
Thank you very much, Themis, for these very important remarks. Indeed, the last year and a half was quite a challenging year, but it also created a lot of opportunities to enhance and strengthen cooperation. As you said, digital education cannot work in isolation, and through this extended and reinforced cooperation and engagement, we do believe that we can support the digital transformation in education and training. On our side, of course, we are investing in accelerating the digital education through the hub, as you already underlined, Themis. We launched 2 days ago, let me inform our audience, an open call for tenders for support activities related to the hub. So let me invite also the audience to look into this, also to share this call with the interested parties and also consider applying. So once again, many thanks, Themis, for these opening remarks. So now, before we move to our discussion with today's panelists, we would like to hear from you in the audience on how you reflected upon this crisis. So how do you consider this period to be a turning point for education and training? So please pick up your mobile phone, or you open a new window in your browsers and go to Slido. You can then enter the code that you see on your screen. You will have 4 options to vote. Option number 1, you think that this crisis can be a trigger for leading to more effective innovation in education and training. Option 2, you consider this period as resulting in more investments and initiatives on digital education. You have also option 3, this recent experience will make users more critical of their use of digital technologies. And option 4, you think that nothing will change in terms of digital education. So please submit your replies. We will look later at the answers that you've given to this short poll, but now I would like to turn to our panel and thank again Birgit, Florian and Tommaso for being with us today. Before I turn to our panelists, I see that we have option 2 actually. You consider this period as resulting in more investments and initiatives on digital education as the most supported amongst the participants in the audience. Thank you very much for replying to this short poll. But let me now turn to our panelists and once again thanking them for being with us. The audience, please share your comments in the chat box or ask any questions you may have to our panelists during the discussion now. For our panelists, I have one question for each. And as I said, I'm starting with Birgit now. Birgit, you have taken the time to be with us on a day which is a holiday in Estonia. So Estonia is well known as a digital nation, and you all already started in the 90s in your digital transition. But this start was not from education. It applied a whole government approach. So when I was reading the Education and Training Monitor that was published last year, I particularly noticed the mentioning that the constant focus on digital education has actually allowed a rather swift and smooth transition to digital learning as a response to the COVID-19 crisis. So my question to you is, from your work at the Ministry of Education and Research in Estonia, could you share with us the experiences you went through in your digital journey to become a model for digital transformation? Over to you.
Well, thank you. This is a rather challenging question. But I would say that the start, as you mentioned, was with other public services that we have in Estonia, that they went digitalized and we say like online. And the focus of course was on efficiency, but also on digital dividends, meaning that we have to look for the added value if we speak about digitalization. And why? This is because Estonia is a small country, and in the 90s, the resources, especially the financial resources, were limited. So we had to be very strategic. By 20 years of investing in the area, we could say that before COVID-19 hit us, the infrastructure, the connectivity, and also to a certain extent the tools for education were in place. Teacher training for digital skills were in place. We have been investing in it for 20 years, and also the digital skills for pupils, meaning that the digital approach was, digital is one of the general competences, and we have the horizontal and also vertical technological approach to learning. What is important to stress is that the tools, content and solution market in Estonia has been always belonged to the private market. State only initiates innovation in creating the content, meaning bringing on board edtech startups, creating new initiatives, focusing on more to study outcomes than the content itself. And this has enabled to flourish very competitive educational and also digital learning market, which I have to stress that some of us or some of you would believe that everything happens in Estonia which in education is digital. Not at all. We have this dual system, which means the material is also paper-based and at the same time digital in digital forms, and teachers and pupils can choose what kind of options to use. This kind of flexibility was introduced about 10 years ago, and it's a strategic choice to step by step introduce the new era of study materials. But what happened during the COVID? Actually, the boost of assessment tools. Everyone needed feedback. How is my child doing? What are the expected outcomes? Are they lagging behind? What is how well they learn? So the boost of diagnostic tools, testing tools, feedback tools got initiated. The learning management system we had in place years before the COVID actually gave instant feedback how the child was doing, were they progressing compared to the cohort from last year's or years before, or are they lagging behind, or maybe they're not connecting at all, they remained offline. So immediately we could focus and put the attention on that. And also, since the student well-being, also teachers and parents' well-being is a crucial question, we focused on solutions that provided online help, on psychological online help, psychological special pedagogy help, and online speech therapy help for pupils. And also students with special needs always had the ability to go on one-on-one learning at school. So they were never actually forced to have a distance learning experience. And also for teachers, we had a hotline present and special educational and technological help, which they could just call in and ask help to do some materials or to give feedback, or just to just a basic question, what tools to use. And also for parents, the hotline for parental help is still functioning and going on, just because parents, they need support as well. What I have to say that the wise decision made many years ago, a decade ago, to have on a side of the teacher, to have an educational technologist present in each and every school actually has paid off, because it helped the ones who were maybe a little bit lagging behind on the technological development, and those who are actually doing quite well, that the help on spot was constantly present. And last but not least, the school lunches, which are for free in Estonia, were actually distributed physically to each and every child who needed it during the hybrid learning. So we actually survived this 10 or 12 weeks quite happily. Students were educated, fed, and at the end, the well-being was quite all right after the survey we made this spring. So 40% were very satisfied and would like to continue. 40% were so-so, and the last 20 said that they would like to return at school.
Thank you very much, Birgit, for sharing your experience and, of course, for your very engaging remarks. It's very useful to know the example of Estonia on how a political vision can be turned into practice and how it can be achieved. I think that Estonia is indeed a model in many respects, and this will be certainly an example we are going to look at in the Digital Education Hub. Now I would like to turn to Florian. Florian, who is here with us today in the context, he represents the perspective of higher education with the work that your organization, the Hochschulforum Digitalisation, is carrying on to orchestrate the adaptation of higher education in the digital age. So, Florian, can you please share with us your experience on what were the needs of your communities in this post-COVID, in this COVID period, and how can we go beyond these needs in order to have a meaningful, innovative, and high-quality digital education in the future?
That's a big question to ask, I believe, but I think when I reflect on the needs of our different communities in the last 1.5 years, it was always a balance between exchange and inspiration. You need to be pragmatic on the one hand and visionary on the other hand. So our communities had very concrete needs regarding, for example, online exams, had concrete needs regarding exchange or new didactical approaches towards their teaching and learning, or had very concrete needs regarding the technical tools they were using. So the pragmatic start is and was for our work to really identify concrete topics where barriers and needs were especially relevant when looking at online teaching and learning. And on the other hand, I believe, and the idea of what we do with the German Forum for Higher Education in the Digital Age is that you need to reach the broader community of practice with kind of a pragmatic approach that respects their reality. But it's kind of boring if you're not visionary at the same time and really try to innovate. It's just often different community members with different needs that we need to target. And you need to be really clear about the individual in your community of practice. And you need to be really clear about the offer that you develop for that member of your community. I think our community was like, we have thousands of higher education teachers and learners in our community. And it was quite inspiring long before the COVID crisis, but it was more the first movers who were working with us, who were like working on peer-to-peer exchange, who were continuously developing their educational practices. And last year, we reached out to a new community that was not a first mover community, which is totally fine, but that was more in need to really start talking about the crucial topics before innovating together. And if I look back now at the toolboxes that we developed 1.5 years ago and the very pragmatic guidelines and reflect on the innovation, like in the edtech field that we are focusing on now, I believe that we are still, and that we are already on this path of not only reacting ad hoc to the needs of a community that was often overwhelmed last year, but also really identifying those fields where we want to innovate. I just came, for example, from a workshop today on online examinations. For the last year, we were very much focusing on legal requirements on examinations. And we are very much focusing on very concrete discussions about, can I do this or not? And now, step by step, we are really also moving to the field of what is actually the future that we want and how can we shape that together regarding the concrete topic of examinations. And I'm really proud that we, for example, as a German stakeholder, were able to gather in the last year stakeholders around Europe in a community of practice on examinations that is reflecting on the status quo, but that is at the same time also developing a desirable future, so to say, that is going to shape innovative education in a way, I think, that it's also based on European values and European approaches. And this is, I think, to summarize, really the balance. Be pragmatic, look at the needs of your communities, look at the concrete practices that you need to discuss. And based on that, inspire each other, develop visions for European educational approaches. And I think this is a dynamic that we have just started to enter into. And I think this is something that is really going to be shaped by such new networks as established within the European Digital Education Hub.
Thank you very much for these very important remarks, Florian. I agree with you with the fact that we need pioneers, but pioneers are not a novelty, or we need more. We need to be pragmatic. We need to have a vision. These are all very important remarks when we need to consider and work together in mainstreaming innovation in digital education. We know that from the past we have had previous experience and previous micro practices, but what needs to be done right now is really taking them to a higher level and mainstreaming innovation in digital education. And this will be a central point, as you said, also for the Digital Education Hub. So our next speaker is Tommaso from the European Schoolnet. Tommaso, you have been working already for many years in supporting schools in becoming really innovative learning places. And the European Schoolnet is the coordinator of a project, the Impact EdTech, which aims to accelerate the digital solutions in education. So it will be really very interesting for us to hear your views on how the public and private sector could cooperate for high quality, inclusive digital education. Over to you, Tommaso.
Thank you and good afternoon. Let me firstly thank you very much for this invite. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, and I'm also happy to witness how tangibly the actions of the Digital Education Action Plan are developing. This is very timely, very needed, and we're happy to support if we can. European Schoolnet is a network of public authorities mainly, so we're a network of ministries of education trying to bring about innovation in education, and primarily, of course, we've been trying to foster this dialogue among ministries for better policies, better integration of IT in education. Now, in the last decades, indeed, we try to engage more and more the private sector, research centers, companies, startups, edtech, and IT companies that would have to do with school innovation as well. And we thought that a very important element. And to answer your question, the first process that we tried to establish was to create trust among the public and the private sector, trying to make sure they could see that their objectives were not so further apart, that they could really collaborate for a more inclusive and a higher quality digital education. Then very recently, about 2 years ago, and just before the pandemic, we had the chance to engage and coordinate a project, which you mentioned, the Impact EdTech, which is funded by the European Commission and allowed us to create a hybrid incubator and accelerator for EdTech startups. So in this specific project, we had the chance to pilot new ways of making sure that the private and the public sector would collaborate. We would identify the needs of the market, first of all, of the sector really, and that would be done especially in collaboration with the ministry, with experts, with research centers, with stakeholders. Once the needs were identified, we tried to select those companies that would most effectively answer or meet those needs, and we would help them validate their solutions and improve them before we would go into a piloting phase, and we would then develop together with them a kind of pedagogical framework which is absolutely necessary to make any innovation be effective in real educational settings. And after that, we would have accelerated the solutions in the digital education sector. So all of these processes lead us to take some lessons together with us, and we hope this might be helpful in informing also the activities of the hub and the action plan in general. And one, going back to the previous point that I mentioned, is trust. Trust between the public and the private sector is built and is also broken. So it's a process that is necessary to create those foundations for an open dialogue and real collaboration. This is fundamental. The second point that I would like to summarize is the fact and the realization and the acceptation that to complex matters, to complex issues, we cannot respond necessarily with simple solutions. There are no simple solutions. Most often, the private and the public sector, what they have to build together is not even a program, is a strategy for responding to the needs that are identified with appropriate educational technological solutions, making sure the solutions fit the context, that are properly integrated pedagogically in a pedagogically sound way in the classroom, that this process provide a feedback to providers of technology, and that everything is underlined by an important element of engagement and retention of those actors that ultimately would deliver education, so teachers, schools, and ministries of education. And finally, an important aspect that we also think it's fundamental for an effective collaboration between the private and the public sector is that a solution is for all or is not. So we have to include by design, inclusion, accessibility into everything that we would develop, whether they are technological solutions or program. And since school is supposed to be the space where every child is given an opportunity to thrive in life, this big responsibility gives to the public and the private sector this need really to make sure that any intervention is for all. It doesn't serve the lighthouse schools or the most innovative ones or the one that have most resources only, but it really is for everything. And with this, I would like, of course, also to compliment you for the choice of the name of the panel, which is extremely important, and that was brought so clearly into the discussion by the crisis that we unfortunately had to live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommaso. Indeed, the work you're doing is very timely, and we will certainly consider the experience that you have and also the involvement of the EdTech sector for setting up the digital education hub. I would like to thank all speakers now for these very interesting and valuable contributions. I see that we have now received some questions from our audience, so I would like to move to these questions and, of course, invite the audience to consider some additional questions. If we have the time, of course, we'll take them as well. But let me now start with the first question, which I would like to actually ask Birgit. Birgit, how do you think we can bridge the gap between formal education and informal education? Is there such a gap? What can we do in terms of digital education? Over to you.
Yes, I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that putting things in digital is not sustainable anymore. So digitalization has to bring innovation. What I said before, we look for and we have to aim for digital dividends. What I mean is that, for example, as we heard, exams. We have paper-based exams, and then we think the innovation is to have a digitalized exam. No, this is not an innovation. Innovation would be to use the digital tools, artificial intelligence, and all the other learning outcome markers to make sure that exams are actually not needed anymore. So we can actually solve problems in different ways. So I think the bridge between non-formal and formal education and also informal education would diminish. There will be extremely hard to say where the knowledge was actually coming from. And based on study outcomes, we will see much more micro degrees, micro approach on education in the future.
Thank you very much, Birgit, for these reflections. I would like now to move to the next question, which I would like to actually address to both Tommaso and Florian. This is about the stakeholders and the collaboration of the various stakeholders involved in this process and how we can make it work in the hub. We already heard that trust is extremely important. It is essential if we would like to make digital education work. So probably, Florian, you can start first.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think maybe adding to the answer we just heard, I'd say openness is key. And this applies to bridging gaps between different fields of education, but this especially also applies to collaboration. There needs to be a shift in the attitude towards collaboration. And I think we saw that a lot in the last year, that stakeholders who were maybe sometimes before perceiving themselves as competitors appear to be much more open to collaborate. And that's the crucial attitude that we need in order to work together in a joint European education area. I think there are still some steps to move forward, but I think openness is key. And that has a lot to do with trusting each other as well. At the same time, making use of digital tools. Europe is big, and we want to collaborate across all of Europe. For that, we need to develop new ideas and pathways forward to collaborate. I think the DigiEduHack, a great initiative that has been implemented in the last year by the Commission, is a good example on how to bring together a European education community in order to innovate jointly, and there's a lot more we can do.
Thank you very much, Florian. And Tommaso, would you like to complement what was already said and what you've already shared with us as views on that topic, but more concretely something which has not been exploited for the hub as recommendations or views for us?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, well, I agree with Florian, of course, but yeah, what I could add is possibly that it's important to find a common purpose in whichever attempt of collaboration that would need to be developed within the hub. So once these different actors understand that they might have an objective in common, and they identify that underlying purpose, the collaboration tend to flow somehow independently and effectively and meaningfully. And then finally, it's important also that all actors realize the capacity that others have. They might not realize how much effort or investments are put into research and development by some companies, for instance. They might refer only to research centers, but also private sector can actually contribute quite effectively through all the data and information and studies they've carried out and collected throughout the years. And I think that shouldn't be forgotten.
Absolutely agree with you. I think that this is really the starting point to have a common objective in order to really achieve on this ambitious priority that we have set for the digital education in Europe. I have now one question which I would like to ask all our panelists, and this is about the role of open source and open education. How do you see their role in the transformation of digital and hybrid education? Birgit, would you like to start with some reflections on this question?
Well, yes, basically our education like platforms or education sources are based on open source materials, meaning that we create a digital school bag for kids, and it's up to them to decide what kind of content to use, or for the teacher what kind of content to create or use as well. So I think we have to share the knowledge. We have to actually trust that not everything has to be based on profits and big money, that actually open source can do some good, but on the side, of course, we have to guarantee that the quality and the content is reliable and actually mirrors the needs of the curriculums and study outcomes we expect to have.
Thank you very much, Birgit. Tommaso, would you like to continue with any additional reflections you may have on this question?
Well, I like to think, and maybe I'm a bit idealistic, that education is not a market, but it's a responsibility. So everybody should feel the urge to contribute to it with as many resources and they could have. And hence, open source and sharing of information, educational resources, and so on is quite crucial for this to happen. It leads also to something else that is extremely powerful in mainstreaming innovation in education, which is peer learning, exchange, co-construction. We saw that once teachers start to work together, when schools start to work together, even at pan-European level, this sentiment of isolation is overcome. And also there's an extremely powerful sense of empowerment and a build of confidence that it is extremely relevant to bring about digital innovation that anyway in many contexts is extremely new. So that's a wish also that I would like to formulate.
Thank you very much indeed. Very valuable thoughts from your side, Tommaso. And Florian, from your side, anything on open education and open sources?
I think regarding open education strengthens access to education. That is crucial in my perspective, and that's what motivates me to work in digital education. If we look at the EU skills agenda and all the skills and competencies that we need amongst all lifelong learners in Europe, we can only achieve our goals if we move forward in quite an open way, perceiving education as a responsibility, as Tommaso said, and as a public good. And I think there's still a long way to go. Regarding open source, it's really interesting discussions that we're having in Germany also, because it is becoming more and more a funding requirement. I think what is crucial is it can play a role in all educational fields if open source developments do not only mean that you're not allowed to develop business models, which is really important. There are Creative Commons licenses that allow for business models for open educational resources. There are open source licenses that allow for software as a service approaches. So I think too often the discourse is like a black and white discourse, fully open and non-profit, or not open and for-profit. The really interesting middle in between is, I think, what is going to push education forward in Europe in the future.
Thank you very much, Florian, for sharing also the German experience in this. There will be further discussions, and certainly this is a highly important issue we'll continue dealing with in the future. We have a little bit of time, and I have one question which I would like to ask again to all of you, if you can very shortly share your views on that. We know that there has been different experience and a lot of challenges during the COVID crisis, and there's still a lot of people who are not convinced in the digital education, the use of digital technologies, or probably against digital innovation in education. What do we need to do in order to convince these people? Could you please give a very short reply to this question? Over to you, starting now with Tommaso.
Thank you. It's a very, very complex question, but maybe, yes, I would just reinforce what I mentioned before. I think that peer learning, educators learning from other educators that have implemented some practices related to digital education is really the most powerful way to convince the ones that wouldn't be yet so eager to integrate those. And there's really very little other ways, I think, to convince them, as any top-down approach might scare them away even further.
Yeah, thank you. Birgit, what do you think about it? How we can convince the people who are not yet convinced?
I'm actually a strong advocate for personalized learning, meaning that everyone could choose their own extent in digitalized education or actually analog education. So, but I would say it comes step by step, as we have seen with public services in Estonia. So you have to make it more challengeable and more added value. And this is actually will go slowly, step by step, but we will eventually get there. But of course, added value and show the dividends.
Thank you very much, Birgit. Florian, the last word on this question is to you. Anything else to add? Do you have any other recipes?
I think it's really dare to dream, but respect the reality of the individual, the added value of the individual who is not the first mover, who is not the pioneer. That has to be very clear to them. Otherwise, you will not get everyone along on our pathways. So respect the individual's needs and respect that we are not all innovators, and then we will jointly move forward. I'm really convinced that we can do that.
Thank you very much, Florian. I see on the screen that we have other very interesting questions. Unfortunately, we do not have more time to take additional questions, but let me very warmly thank to all our speakers, Birgit, Florian, and Tommaso. We very much hope that we can count on your experience, your expertise, your contribution in the future in setting up the Digital Education Hub and making it work, of course. Many thanks also to all our colleagues who have contributed for the preparation of this session and making this event work so well. I would like also to thank the audience for joining us today to this session and discussing this very important topic. Let me say a few concluding remarks before we close the session. I would like first of all to underline something which came out very clearly from the discussion, namely that there is a momentum for digital education and we need to keep up this momentum. We also need to enhance enhance and further strengthen our digital capacities, we also need to further push for innovation. What is very important is to embrace the opportunities that we currently have. And here we can think of the European programs and instruments that are in place, coming now with the new programming period, but also with the unprecedented new funding for the recovery. We have also a lot of opportunities for peer learning and further cooperation, and we very much believe that they will further realize in the new Digital Education Hub, which will come into place at the end of this year. So let me once again thank you all and hope that we'll see you in the Hub very soon to further continue this important conversation. Thank you.